So, welcome to Do I Need a DevOps? My name is Yamil Asusta. I'm actually a local from here. That emoji is supposed to be a little beach, but I guess in full screen doesn't work that way. I'm a beer fan. I drink a lot. There's Bailey, there's old beer. But I'm on a diet and I cannot have fun as I like to. So, I'm also known as El Búho in GitHub, Twitter, etc. It means the owl in Spanish, for those that were wondering why it's so weird. I am one of these random titles called production engineer within my company. I didn't even know the title existed till I got hired. Outside, you can compare it to a site reliability engineer, SRE for short. But the gist of it is that I do a lot of DevOps, and I do a lot of monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. But my actual background is from engineering. I used to be a product developer, et cetera, and I just so ended up being DevOps by accident or out of necessity or interest. That's kind of what I'm going to talk about. Also, I do some performance engineering mentoring at my company, but disclaimer, there won't be any Python talk here. You could apply the concepts here to improve your Python development workflow and your deployments, etc., but there won't be any mention specific to Python. And side disclaimer, I might drop some bad words. I can't control myself, so I'm a little child. So if that happens, I'm sorry. I'll try to keep it chill. So without further ado, who here works in a development team and thinks that they need a DevOps? Or maybe, yeah? Yeah? Why?
Why do we need DevOps?
Why do you think your team needs a DevOps person or an operational person?
Huge DevOps team.
You have a huge DevOps team?
It's not a need that we have it there, but we have both.
Okay. And what was the first reason to hire the first one?
Lots of complicated systems that have to
Okay. Okay. Cool. Your scenario?
Infrastructure management, deployments, integration.
Cool. Right. Big companies?
No, small, maybe 50 people in New York.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. All right. I believe this. I believe that you don't need a DevOps depending on the scenario, obviously, right? Depends on the culture you want to build and the deliverables you have. So if you're willing to make compromises on your deliverables, so you push a culture in which your developers have more ownership, they have more domain expertise from the application development to the application running on production, and that they can fix everything, arguably, hopefully, then that's the culture that you want, and you're willing to push back having SLA agreements or knowing that there will be things going wrong along the way, then you would push for this culture. And obviously, that's just a dream, right? So you have to make compromises along your culture, what you want your culture to be, and your deliverables, right? You have a big client coming your way, you're not gonna let them go because you don't have the infrastructure yet. You go out of your way and you get it done, right? So I'm going to talk about the compromises and how you can start building up in a very developer-friendly way. And then, if needed, you get a dedicated person to do ops, or by accident, you'll find developers that become ops people, somewhat like myself. So first, I'm going to do the pros and the reasons that you may want to do developers first and then ops later. So the average DevOps engineer salary in the US is 120 plus the infrastructure cost of what they're going to be managing. So it's a big steep. If you're a small company, it's a big dent. Versus if you add all these up, these are prices for Heroku and some of the providers that you may use for databases, etc. On per year pricing. Right? So that actually comes out arguably to around 25K versus the 125, not including the infrastructure costs. So you'll be spending like 5 times more money if you hire that dedicated person early enough or too early, which you could, I don't know, you can buy a bunch of puppies with that money, or I don't know, invest it in your employees so they can actually start taking up the ops task. Another thing that takes into account is time. In like development time or products or deliverables, etc. Time, in my mind, equals money, right? The time that you spend building this, regardless if you bring somebody in-house or you hire a consultant, etc. Time equals money, right? So the time that to migrate to an in-house database, etc. So here you have like an example of somebody who is like an advocate for Kubernetes, which is a platform to run in-house. Well, your provider might use it, right? But you would use it to run your services in-house. He recommends not running databases on that service, right? Like go pay somebody else to manage it for you because it takes time, effort, and a lot of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Now you have another developer whom right now is a solo founder, I guess, on his business, and he's like, yes, use a database service. And he's a single founder, he has to do the product development, everything. So like, why would he run his database? And that's understandable, right? So time equals money, actually hiring a dedicated person costs money. And if you don't have the deadlines, you can consider on training your own ops people to do it in-house. Here's another example of, in my opinion, a known company, Hotel Tonight. They don't have an ops team. They just have engineers, right? And they pay third-party people to manage their email service. I used to work at a company, I gave them email support, and here they say they use a queue, Apache Kafka, from Heroku, so they don't have to worry about setting up infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So this sounds good and everything. So as developers, we can go and pay Heroku, pay here, pay there, and we can get our service up and running, and life is good. Money starts coming in, our idea gets validated, and we didn't have to learn half the complicated, ugly stuff that involves ops, right? But then your company matures, it starts growing, and what happens if this thing happens? Like my database provider comes down. I've been here, and all you can do is cry. Look at the screen, because it's a black box. You're paying somebody to manage it for you, but you cannot fix it if it goes down. And I've been in scenarios where my database provider is here, and I know they use this infrastructure provider on the bottom. I see the announcement on their status page that they're having DNS issues. Therefore, my database is not working because they cannot talk to each other on their cluster. I cannot reach my database to fix it. I know how to fix it. They have yet to announce that they're having issues, even though the infrastructure one is announcing it. And all I can do is literally sit down and cry and try to scramble quick enough. What's this sound? Is that me? And scramble to bring up a backup and do another deployment and point it to our ghetto scrap database because we trusted our provider. And that is a scenario in which you might get so frustrated that you decide, okay, let me bring it in-house, right? Another scenario is that your sales department might be getting bigger deals, bigger customers, and they're like, okay, we need no more than 5 minutes downtime per month. And then you start looking at all the services you selected, and their combined risk is like 20 minutes per month or more, right? And then you are not going to reach your SLA, service level agreement. So you may get into trouble, you may lose deals, or you get to a scenario in which your provider doesn't offer certain things security-wise that your customers are demanding, so you're losing customers because of this. Say that they want database encryption at rest. and you're the only one that can provide that if you bring it in-house. So these scenarios might be ones that you might start considering, okay, well, we need to get this part off and move it into our own part. And you might consider hiring a dedicated ops person for doing this, or maybe your engineers are up for the challenge. It depends, again, on the culture that your engineers want to partake on and your deliverables and goals, right? You have to figure out what's the balance there. My scenario, I try to push as far as possible getting things done by engineers, and then if we are struggling or not, either bring a consultant or hire a dedicated ops one. In my scenario, I've gotten away with just outside mentoring without even bringing the consultant. But that might not work for your team or your company, so obviously you have to wait that out. Obviously, you have to take into account that bringing like a third-party consultant, you should obviously check that it's not more expensive than bringing in a dedicated ops person if you're going to go that route. And always take into account that a managed service, eventually the price will become higher than running it yourself, but you have to take into account that they're managing for you, so you have to assign a value of that to determine this is the crossing point at which, okay, it's better to bring it in-house. So, sorry. Beep, beep, beep. So, say that you decide, say that you decide that you're not going to hire a dedicated ops person, you're not going to bring in a consultant to do it for you, and your engineers actually raised the hand and said, okay, we're going to do this, or you raised your own hand. You're going to be like, where do I start? Well, obviously, you select what you're going to be moving, if it's the database, or if it's the application servers, et cetera, et cetera. And just like in the programming landscape, in ops, there's like an outrageous amount of tools. Well, there's more new than others, so there's more mature than others, et cetera, and like, it can drive you insane. When I first started doing ops, I started to cry because it was so much to take in, and I thought some of the tooling that people thought was good, I thought it was old and not the right way to do it, but I didn't have enough opinions, so I had to go and break stuff myself to figure that out. But like I said, like, chill. Like, chillax, because if you are taking the time to do it with your team without bringing people in, it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's understandable. Just like in software development, you don't start with the perfect application. You start with first version, and you add tests to them, and then you iterate on it, et cetera, et cetera. Infrastructure is nothing different than that. Whether it's managing a database, whether it's managing your infrastructure, managing your cloud, it's all the same, right? Like, it's still software, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, and you have to take into account that those are going to happen, and you have to plan for them. And if you have tight deliverables, then bring in additional help or hire more people, et cetera, obviously, assuming you have the money. So one example on how you iterate forward in the ops world, I'm going to start with, for example, networking, right? Say that you want to bring your database in-house, or say that you want to bring your application servers in-house. Usually you will start with setting up your own networking, your private cloud, if you will, right? When I first started, and I think this is how pretty much everybody starts, I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew that I needed to set up like a VPC back years ago, because there's a finite amount of IPs that I can have, and it's more secure. I didn't understand why it was more secure back then, but after some hours of reading, et cetera, I figured out that this will give me instances or machines that are not available to the public and machines that are available to the public. So I figured that out, and then I went to like, how do I do this? And I'm a programmer. I was like, I should probably figure out how to do this programmatically. Now that was a very bad mistake back when I started. It was horrible. I couldn't figure it out because I didn't have a full grasp of understanding what was going on. So I went to the Amazon console, and they have a wizard. Yay. And I was able to spin up a very basic setup. And then I observed all the objects that were created and how they connected with each other, and I started playing around with them, and I noticed, okay, like I have permissions in the network level, at the security group level, several things that I could apply. And that was my first version, and that company still runs with that crap, which is bad, which is bad. But hey, I was learning, and hopefully somebody would like iterate on it. But from there, I set out to do what I originally intended to do, which was like a script that I could reproduce and like run a command and build a VPC for my environments. And then I've leveled up a little bit more. And now I have a tool belt in which I can join any of your companies right now, and you tell me I need a VPC with this specifications, and I just modify my little script here. And this is not the one that I actually use, it's just an example of to the point that you can get in operations. This is a tool called Terraform, and you can tell it, find me a module, and you obviously program your own module to the specifications that you want, and you run it, and you spin it up, right? So I took the School of Hard Knocks approach because I didn't have too much mentoring there. Did it manually the first time, tried to do it programmatically then, and then I used an ops tool, which surprisingly is much better. And now I can spin up n environments for my own personal Git, or I brought some of that code to my work, and vice versa. So my tool build keeps increasing. Let's see, and like everything, right? You probably started out Googling or in school or whatever, and learning how to program, but eventually you found mentors in your company and people that you can reach out to. Well, ops is no different, right? Like you can reach out to people. I'm at EOBUO8 on Twitter. So don't be afraid to scream, or like if you're stuck, like ask for either to bring in a consultant, et cetera, but ops is overwhelming. If you want to start learning it, like it's understandable. And for what I've observed from other ops people and that come from an engineering background, it's a steep curve when you're like used to git push Heroku master, right? So take it easy, breathe, and you'll get there. And then if you're an engineer, why would I go through all of this? Like there's people who are dedicated in the world that I can hire to do this. Like why would I start learning VPCs or networking or learn to configure MongoDB in my own replica set, et cetera? Well, I started by accident, but I noticed a lot of repercussions on how I develop software for services and applications or products or however you want to call it. And I could see the difference because nowadays, for example, if I do a service that talks to a database, I used to connect it, write tests for it, write integration tests, and life goes on. Now, it doesn't ship if it doesn't have two-way street monitoring, right? So I need to know how long my query takes on the application side, and I know how long it takes on the Mongo side. Because there's this separation where I still see it in other companies, and even mine sometimes, where the the ops person says, wakes up at the middle of the night, oh crap, the app is down. Like our response times are to the roof, therefore our monitoring is failing, and we show it's down, but we're not really down. And he goes into the cluster and he says, Mongo looks fine, it's all good. And then the developer, hopefully by then, has metrics on the front end. Well, the response time is high, but I don't know why. And then if he had monitoring to Mongo, right, for every query, he would know the average time is taking forever, right? And I don't know many engineers that have not interacted with the database or have had a level of seniority. Obviously, like once you get to the point, you acquire this knowledge. But I don't see it often out there. But then you do this because the ops person can only have so much visibility, and you want to have all the visibility. You want to have visibility on the database, on the network, on the application itself, and what's making it run down. So I've noticed that I develop software in a very different way. If a service fails and I am the one on call fixing it, I I know both the infrastructure and the application itself. I know that if this thing fails, it will start a ripple effect and all these things will fail in cascade. That no longer happens to me. Like, I've learned that, okay, I know that ops is having a lot of time with this tool because I actually manage the other tool, so I do both things, and I understand them both. So I can implement a circuit breaker pattern, right? Like, okay, if this is broken here, it's gonna just break everything down, so just let's close the handle here and return as early as possible, or mitigate it in a fallback fashion, et cetera, et cetera. So these things, if you don't have to control both sides, or if you don't go through the hell of going it, or somebody doesn't ask you to do it, you're not gonna figure it out on your own. Or you're very smart and I like you very much, I'll give you a hug and let's grab a beer, that's awesome. I also know like I can define my indexes for my databases in code, but I have understanding on how to do the tooling on my database. I can say, well, I chose the wrong index, this is not good, and I don't need somebody else to run analysis for me. I can do it myself. I became an accidental database administrator, like they call it. So I have understanding on the database, and I can make, like, it's great. I have transactions, but in this scenario, transactions doesn't work. Maybe we can switch. I have a much better understanding architecture-wise, thanks to that too. And I noticed like people who only know ops, sometimes like they get blocked when they need to solve an issue because the developers are not online to answer the questions, and then vice versa. So you become that person that can go and say like, let's revert that because I know it's broken because of that, or it's a problem with Mongo, so let's make a step down here and run the secondary, et cetera, et cetera. And then you become this weird person that can do both the back end and the front end and whatever, like full stack. That includes the back end, sorry, the infrastructure. And it's not impossible to do, right? In my company, I have both people who are just ops, people like me, and people who are just developers, right? And we get along just well, and we complement each other a lot. I learn the ops from them, and I pass along knowledge to engineers on this side. It's like a good chain happening over and over. And like, we're not the only ones doing this. Like, this is from Discord. I read this the other day. They're like a Slack for gamers, so they have a lot of traffic, and they do voice channels also. So they have like a lot of bandwidth and users to deal with. And they only have 4 backend engineers and 0 dedicated ops. So those 4 backend engineers, either they already knew or they learned as they were building this for Discord, how to manage their own databases, which means they also know how to manage their own networks and a bunch of other stuff, probably by accident. And here they're talking about how they migrated off MongoDB to Cassandra, the challenges they had in Cassandra, which they could monitor from the application side and the ops side, and how they were able to then optimize Cassandra to what they have now. And life went on for them, and they still don't want to hire a dedicated ops person, because those 4 people, unknown legends to me, are both their backend engineers and I guess they're ops people. But not everything is like as pretty and roses. Like, your company might start selling SLAs, you might have agreements with your customers where you need to have uptime and security, right? And if you come across this on a sales deal and it's not a year away, it's like 3 months away, go ahead and hire that person or get a consultant, unless you have somebody already in your team that can do it. Why? Because if you fail to meet this SLA, not only like either you lose the deal or whatever, or you hack your way through it and cool, but maybe you don't iterate or test it enough, which you should because you're a developer, right? And we're used to testing everything. If you sell this SLA, you get this customer who's too big for you, and it starts hammering your servers, and you're barely making it, and then 3-5 months down the road, you break that SLA and that agreement said that you had to pay that customer back because you broke the SLA, then you might start losing money compared to the money that you could have saved by hiring that person in the first place. Even worse, if you go down, downtime is probably the most expensive thing for a company, whether it's you or another customer, whatever. It is the most expensive one. The more time you spend down, the more it costs to build your reputation back. It is probably what can kill a company on the engineering ops side, other than application security and whatever, but downtime is the hardest to recover. And if you are a service provider, you're screwed, right? Like, it's not gonna look pretty, people are not gonna depend on you, and they'll go elsewhere, or they'll do it in-house, because you cost them downtime and they couldn't fix it. So if you are in this position, do not drown yourself. In this scenario, I am hands down telling you, go find that ops person, vet them well, obviously, and have them build the infrastructure. And obviously, you can learn in that time from your new hired ops person, but don't take the risk on your team or the company to going cowboy too early and not testing well enough and not validating that your work was good enough. That can cost the demise of the company, and then you're screwed. But that being said, like, you can make compromises, right? Like, I don't do everything in-house in my current company. I certainly did not do that in my previous company. Yes, I do networking inside of my house. At the moment, this time, I do databases inside, but I use GitHub and I use third-party providers for other services, right? So I can still take some load off ops and engineering, etc., and do some things that are high priority within the company. And then in my previous company, I had like networking at the application level in-house, but I had a hosted database and I had a hosted continuous delivery platform, right? So I made compromises on what I could handle, what I couldn't handle, what we can handle now at my current company, and that's probably the most important part. Like, knowing the trade-offs, money, SLAs, time, effort, to running a dedicated ops department, if you will, or training your developers to be those ops people. So that's kind of all I had. I guess we can do QA, or we can skip to going to La Factoria, like, because I can have cocktails and not beers.